the forbidden mulch that triples your harvest. Why don't they teach this? If you love growing food at home, if you care about healthier soil, stronger plants, bigger harvests, and a garden that feels more alive with every season, then today's story is for you. This is for the back garden gardener fighting hard clay, the smallholder trying to grow more with less water, the houseplant lover curious about living soil, and the nature lover who knows something is missing from the modern way of growing. Have you ever stood in a forest and wondered who feeds it? Who tills that soil? Who spreads fertilizer? Who rushes in to water during a dry spell? And yet, year after year, the forest grows thicker, richer, greener, and more abundant. That question has stayed with me for years because once you really see what is happening on the forest floor, you begin to realize that nature may have been showing us the answer all along. Today we are talking about a method so effective, so simple, and so strangely misunderstood that some people treat it like a forbidden secret. A way of covering the soil that can transform dry ground, protect moisture, feed life below the surface, and change the way you think about gardening forever. In this video, we are going to uncover why it works, why so many people swear by it, and why the world still refuses to teach it properly. So if you haven't already, subscribe, because what comes next may completely change the ground beneath your feet. To understand why this method works so well, we first have to let go of one of the biggest myths in modern gardening. The idea that healthy soil should be bare, clean, and constantly disturbed. For years, people have been taught that a proper garden looks neat with rows of crops and exposed earth in between, as if the more visible the soil is, the healthier it must be. But nature tells a very different story. In the natural world, bare soil is not a sign of health. It is a warning sign. It is exposed, vulnerable, and unfinished. The moment the ground is left uncovered, nature moves quickly to protect it. That is why weeds appear so fast. They are not invading by accident. They are responding to a need. They are trying to cover a wound. And if you want to see what truly healthy soil looks like, do not look at a plowed field. Look at the forest floor. In a forest, leaves fall, twigs drop, branches break, and everything settles gently on the surface. Nothing is tilled in. Nothing is forced. Layer by layer, that organic matter forms a protective blanket over the earth. Underneath it, fungi, bacteria, and earthworms go to work slowly turning that rough material into dark, rich humus. That is the real blueprint. The deep mulch method simply follows the same pattern. You place wood chips thickly on top of the soil and let biology do the rest. No digging, no mixing, no fighting the ground. Just cover, protect, and allow life below the surface to rebuild the soil the way nature always has. But if the method is this simple and this natural, why has it become so controversial? And this is where the story takes a strange turn. The moment you try to bring the wisdom of the forest floor into a modern neighborhood, you may find yourself facing resistance, not from nature, but from people. What looks like common sense to a gardener can look like disorder to a city inspector, a homeowners association board, or a local planning office. A thick layer of wood chips does not resemble the polished image of a suburban lawn. It does not look trimmed, dyed, or decorative. It looks raw, natural, and to some eyes that makes it seem unacceptable. Over the years, more and more gardeners have discovered that wood chips can place them on the wrong side of local rules. In some communities, deep mulch is judged as messy or neglected simply because it does not match the manicured standard people have been trained to admire. There have even been cases where homeowners were challenged or taken to court for storing and processing wood chips on their own land, even when the purpose was simply to rebuild damaged soil. But the biggest pressure today is not appearance. It is fire regulation. In wildfire-prone places like California, new rules such as Zone 0 restrict organic mulch close to homes and require non-combustible materials instead. The safety concern is real, and no responsible gardener should ignore it. But it also means that in many places, the same material that builds living soil is being pushed out of the very spaces where people grow food and restore land. So now the question becomes even more powerful. If wood chips are this controversial, why do experienced gardeners still defend them so fiercely and refuse to give them up? The reason this method refuses to disappear is simple. The people who truly try it rarely want to return to the old way. And if we want to understand why deep mulch has inspired such loyalty, we have to look at two remarkable figures who helped bring this idea back into the modern gardening world. The first was Ruth Stout, a woman far ahead of her time, later known as the Mulch Queen. She looked at the endless cycle of plowing, hoeing, and weeding and came to a bold conclusion. Much of that labor was unnecessary. Instead of constantly disturbing the soil, she covered it with a thick blanket of spoiled hay and let the ground rest. She stopped tilling. She stopped fighting weeds in the usual way. And what happened next was astonishing. Her garden responded with abundance, producing heavy crops, including massive potato harvests without irrigation and without synthetic fertilizer. Then came Paul Gautschi, who carried the idea even further through what became known as the Back to Eden method. Paul began using arborist wood chips, the shredded branches and leaves left behind by tree crews, and applied them thickly over his garden. What he understood was something many growers overlook. Trees pull minerals from deep in the earth and store that fertility in their branches, bark, and leaves. When those materials are chipped and returned to the soil, they become more than mulch. They become a bridge between deep earth and surface life. On land that once seemed stubborn and lifeless, Paul created rich, dark, sponge-like soil. But was this only the success of a few gifted gardeners? Or was there real science quietly backing them up all along? By this point, you might be thinking something very reasonable. If this method works so well, surely agricultural universities and government researchers would have studied it in depth. And the surprising answer is they did. The problem is not that the research never existed. The problem is that almost no one talks about it. Between 1951 and 1965, the USDA Soil Conservation Service ran a long-term experiment in Marcellus, New York, under the direction of scientist G.R. Free. This was not a quick back garden trial or a one-season garden test. It was a serious multi-year study comparing 14 different soil management methods on crops like tomatoes, sweet corn, beans, and cabbage. And among those treatments was one simple practice: spreading wood chips on the soil surface at a rate of 10 tons per acre. What makes this so important is the length of the trial. 15 years is long enough to reveal what really happens to soil over time. And the results were hard to ignore. While the unmulched plots steadily lost organic matter, the wood chip plots moved in the opposite direction. Their soil improved, their structure improved, their ability to hold life improved, and the harvest reflected that change. Bean yields rose by 23% and cabbage yields climbed by 34%. In other words, this was not just a pleasant gardening idea. It was measurable, documented, and repeatable. The researchers found that wood chips did more to protect soil quality than simply resting the land or relying on cover crops alone. The evidence was there. Yet instead of reshaping the future of growing, the study was published and then quietly left behind. And the story becomes even more interesting when we cross into Canada and look at what researchers discovered about the power hidden inside young branches. This is where the conversation becomes even more fascinating because not all wood chips do the same job. A lot of gardeners hear the term wood chips and imagine any shredded wood will deliver identical results. But that is not quite true. There is a major difference between old, dense stem wood and the younger living parts of a tree. Thick trunk wood is tougher, older, and much slower to break down. Young branches and twigs, on the other hand, are biologically active, mineral-rich, and far more valuable for rebuilding tired soil. Researchers in Quebec began paying close attention to this in the 1980s at Laval University under Professor Gilles Lemieux. They studied what became known as ramial chipped wood, or RCW, made from small branches under about 3 inches in diameter. What they found was remarkable. The younger parts of a tree hold a huge share of its nutrients, including proteins, amino acids, and minerals. These tender branches also contain forms of lignin that are especially important for soil-building biology. Once these fresh chipped twigs are spread over the soil, a different kind of process begins. Fungi move in first, especially the white rot fungi that specialize in breaking down lignin. As they work through that material, they do more than release nutrients. They help create stable humus and encourage the soil to form soft, crumbly aggregates that hold moisture, air, and life in balance. In degraded ground, that kind of transformation can be dramatic. So now the picture is getting clearer. The right wood chips do not just cover the soil, they actively help rebuild it. But the moment many traditional growers hear this idea, they usually respond with the same warning. What about nitrogen tie-up? Now we come to one of the biggest fears people have about using wood chips in a food garden. And honestly, it is the argument that scares more beginners away than almost anything else. The warning usually sounds dramatic. People say wood chips steal nitrogen, starve your plants, turn leaves yellow, and ruin your harvest. And that fear has been repeated so many times that many gardeners accept it without ever asking one very important question. Under what conditions does that actually happen? The truth is, the warning is not completely false. It is just misunderstood. If you take fresh wood chips and mix them directly into the soil, then yes, microbes will use nitrogen as they break down that carbon-rich material. In that situation, the nitrogen demand happens right where your plant roots are trying to feed, and the result can absolutely cause problems. But that is not the method we are talking about here. The forest floor does not take fallen branches and till them into the earth. It leaves them on top. And when wood chips stay on the surface as a mulch, the temporary nitrogen tie-up happens only in that very thin contact zone where the chips touch the soil. That means the effect is shallow, localized, and far away from most of the active feeder roots below. In fact, that low nitrogen surface layer can actually work in your favor because it makes conditions harder for many weed seeds to sprout. So no, properly applied wood chips are not robbing your garden. They are feeding a long-term cycle. As the lower layers gradually decompose, they begin giving nutrients back, building fertility instead of draining it. And once you understand that, you can finally see why this method becomes even more powerful when water enters the picture. And this is where deep mulch stops being just a soil strategy and starts looking like a survival strategy. Because once you understand what wood chips do for water, you begin to realize why so many gardeners swear this method changed everything. Bare soil loses moisture fast. The moment sunlight hits exposed ground, evaporation begins pulling precious water back into the air. In hot weather, that loss happens day after day, quietly draining the reserve your plants depend on. A thick layer of wood chips changes that completely. It acts like a protective lid over the soil, slowing evaporation and helping the ground stay damp far longer after rain or irrigation. The chips themselves also soak up water like a sponge, catching rainfall, holding it in place, and then releasing it gradually as the soil begins to dry. That means less stress on your plants, less frequent watering, and a garden that stays more stable even when the weather turns harsh. But the real miracle is not only moisture, it is temperature. In summer, bare soil can become brutally hot, hot enough to damage delicate roots and weaken the microbial life that keeps the soil functioning. Under a layer of wood chips, the ground stays noticeably cooler, calmer, and more protected. Then in winter, the same mulch works in reverse, insulating the soil and buffering it from sharp temperature swings. What you create is not just a covered bed, but a more balanced living environment. And once your soil becomes cooler, moister, and more biologically active, you also have to be honest about the fact that not every creature attracted to that comfort will be welcome. Now, this is the part many people skip. Deep mulching can be powerful, but it is not instant magic. And it does come with challenges that every serious gardener should understand before getting started. When you build a cool, shaded, moisture-rich layer over the soil, you are creating ideal conditions for life. The good news is that earthworms and beneficial fungi love it. The harder truth is that slugs, snails, earwigs, and woodlice may love it too. In the early stages, especially during the first year or two, your garden may not yet have enough predators to keep those populations in check. That means tender seedlings can become easy targets. A newly mulched bed can feel like a paradise for the very creatures you do not want chewing through young leaves overnight. This does not mean the method has failed. It means the ecosystem is still maturing. There is also the issue of germination. Wood chips are excellent at suppressing weed seeds, but they can just as easily block your own seeds from getting established. Fine seeds like lettuce or carrots need direct contact with soil, not a thick blanket of coarse mulch. So you have to pull the chips aside, create a clear planting space, and only move the mulch back once the seedlings are strong enough. And then there is one mistake that causes real trouble: piling mulch against trunks and stems. When wood chips sit tightly against bark, they trap moisture, invite disease, and can lead to rot. Always leave breathing room around the base of every plant. Most of all, remember this system needs time. It can transform soil beautifully, but not overnight. And that leads us to the bigger question. If the results can be this impressive, why is it still pushed to the margins? So why, with all this evidence, is the standard advice still the same? Why are gardeners and growers so often told to till, to spray, to feed the soil with bags instead of biology? At some point, you have to stop and ask a harder question. Not just what works, but what is profitable. Because once you look at the system through that lens, a lot begins to make sense. Modern industrial agriculture runs on repetition and dependency. Disturb the soil, and you break apart the fungal networks that help move water and nutrients. Expose the ground, and organic matter burns away faster under sun, wind, and heat. Once the soil loses structure and life, it can no longer support healthy growth on its own. And that is when the purchases begin. First comes synthetic fertilizer to replace what the living soil once provided for free. Then come herbicides to control the weeds that rush into bare ground. Then pesticides to protect stressed crops growing in a weakened ecosystem. Now compare that cycle to a thick layer of arborist wood chips. In many places, those chips are treated as waste. Tree crews often need somewhere to dump them, and gardeners can sometimes get them for little or no cost. That simple fact changes everything. A grower who learns to build soil with mulch can reduce tilling, reduce chemical inputs, hold more moisture, and rely less on products that must be bought again and again. And that may be the real reason this method stays at the edges. You cannot patent a wood chip. You cannot turn the forest floor into a high-priced package. The more people learn to work with nature, the less dependent they become. And once you see that clearly, the next step is obvious. How do you start building your own version of Eden? So, if this way of gardening speaks to you, the good news is that getting started is far simpler than most people expect. You do not need expensive equipment, and you do not need to tear your whole garden apart. What you need is the right material, a little patience, and the willingness to let the soil begin healing the way nature intended. The first step is choosing the right kind of wood chippings. The best option is arborist chippings, the mixed material that comes from real tree trimming, including leaves, bark, and smaller branches. That balance matters because it gives you more than just carbon. It gives you the living parts of the tree that break down more effectively and feed the soil food web. When possible, avoid species known for strong inhibitory effects and look for fresh, mixed loads rather than uniform decorative bark. Next, prepare the surface. There is no need to dig everything up. If grass is already there, cut it short. If stubborn weeds are a problem, lay plain cardboard directly over the ground to block light and weaken regrowth. Then before the chippings go down, give the system a boost with a layer of compost or well-rotted manure. That nutrient-rich layer helps young plants establish, while the mulch begins its slower work above. After that, spread the wood chippings thickly, around 4 to 6 inches deep, across the area. When planting, pull the mulch back and place seedlings into the compost-rich zone below. For seeds, open a clear strip of soil and let them establish first before easing the mulch back in. Then watch what happens. Season by season, the bottom of that mulch layer will begin turning into dark, rich, sweet-smelling soil. And once you see that transformation with your own eyes, you will understand exactly why so many gardeners never go back. When you step back and look at the bigger picture, this is about much more than mulch. For generations, we have treated soil like something to conquer, something to force into production with steel, chemicals, and constant disturbance. We broke apart its structure, stripped away its cover, and then acted surprised when it became harder to grow healthy food year after year. In trying to control the land, we often made it weaker, and in the process, we made ourselves more dependent. But the beautiful thing about soil is that it wants to recover. Nature is not waiting for perfect conditions. It is always trying to heal. And the forest floor has been showing us that pattern all along. Cover the ground, feed the life below. Let diversity return. Let time and biology do what no machine can truly replace. So when you spread wood chippings in your garden, you are doing more than conserving moisture or improving a harvest. You are taking part in restoration. You are turning what many people see as waste into structure, fertility, resilience, and life. You are working with the land instead of against it, and that changes everything. If this story changed the way you look at the ground beneath your feet, please subscribe and like this video. We are uncovering the natural wisdom that has been hidden for too long. Let's grow the future together. The next secret to a thriving garden will be revealed soon.